I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
Good morning. Good morning.
What difference at this point does it make?
Der deutsche Nation in einer stolzen Selbsteinschätzung.
Either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy.
But we will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the TCD podcast. Damien White here. Big show planned for you. Let me just get a little background. Got to have a little background there. Beautiful. Thanks everyone for joining us on the Periscope. It's an absolute pleasure as always to see you. Fellow in a meadow, Cujo, and the guest of honour, Mr. Shadilay. You can see in the bubble down there. Everyone get on and follow quick before it's too late. You never know what could happen. So we are going to get into, someone already said, what's Memetics? We will cover that, as is implied in the Periscope title, I'm sure. So we will get around to that, and we'll discuss a few things with Tom, how he got into what he's doing now, where he came from, perhaps where he's headed. First of all, though, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do miss this Periscope, or if you want to share it later on, thecommondiscourse.com. Click on TCD Podcast or TCD Videos, perhaps. This will also go up on YouTube later on. And feel free to fling it around with little regard. This is a slut podcast, really. We'll do it with anyone, and we'll do it anywhere, and we'll do it for nothing. So please take advantage of us. We love being abused. So yeah, my guest tonight, it's Tom Shadilay. He went from the factory floor to the front lines of the culture war, ladies and gentlemen. So, without much further ado, Mr. Shadilay, are you there?
What an entrance. I feel... I'm glad you guys can't see me because I've just donned the largest crown I could find, not to be taking away from my friend's meme that he created, but yeah, I have a crown scepter at this point. I'm in a throne. That was an entrance, my friend.
Excellent. Well, it's what you deserve. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Wolf Perry, thanks for joining us. Tony the Fairy, always a pleasure, guys. Feel free to throw comments and insults at our guest tonight. He does appreciate it. He loves
I'm an easy target, you guys.
He's an easy target. I thought about this a couple of ways where we could start, and I am keen to get into the whole memetics thing because, I want people, our listeners to this podcast to get like a better understanding. I take it you were one of the original, someone said to me, one of the original veterans of the Great Meme War, and I thought that was a fantastic way to put it. So we want to pick your brain and see how we can perhaps apply some of the things you've learnt over your journey to maybe even our situation down here. But first of all, if I can, Tom, I just want to ask a little bit, I first came across you in a Periscope, and you were doing almost like a lecture about funding of genetic engineering laboratories and bringing up government white papers and who lobbied for what and what it means. And I thought, wow, this guy's got some talent. And you're at it for about 5 or 6 hours, and then you said, oh, sorry guys, I've got to go to bed because I've got to be up in about 2 hours to hit the factory floor and do my boring, mundane blue-collar day job. And now here you are. So I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit of how you came to be and what life was like for you before you sort of got involved with Cernovich Media and that kind of thing, and tell us a bit about your journey if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, my lecture days, which, by the way, I really do miss them. I want to do them more. The problem is working that in now. It's a little bit more difficult. It's a little more mentally draining. But I kind of used my factory job as the break. I mean, that like when I went to work, I was actually going to break, in my opinion. And then what I would do too is I would kind of cheat. I would just have headphones on while I was at work all day and just be reading audiobooks. I'd be listening to audiobooks, and I would just try to make it through a book a day or a few books a week. Sure. While I'm working on the floor. But yeah, I miss those days. Those were fun. That's where I first even knew. I didn't know what Periscope was before that, and that's where I first started going. I kind of miss those days a lot. I will be doing some more lectures, I think, lecture style. I don't know. It didn't intend to be lectures, but that's just how it came off. I would watch the replay. I'm like, dang, I'm just kind of doing a lecture there.
Yeah, you get into a zone, and one thing leads to another, and you go deeper and deeper, and people are asking questions and throwing things at you. You know, the thing you said there about put your headphones on, like, that's something that I've done for years, just because I've always worked in sort of blue-collar jobs and, you know, very solitary jobs, you know, so either labouring or driving or something of that nature. And, you know, it's a great thing that you can say to other people, like, you need not, you know, you've got time. If you've got time to sneakily put some headphones on, you can just go about, like, educating yourself in something. It doesn't have to be politics. It doesn't have to be anything serious per se, but why cruise around listening to perhaps, you know, a Hollywood podcast on who's fucking who in LA, or whose makeup artist is under pressure this week because of some horrid red carpet appearance? You know, why not just learn another language, for instance? Like, you can get a podcast and learn something, you know what I mean? So
I tried learning the languages via audiobook. It wasn't hitting the sweet spot, and then I don't know. I don't know if I can do it. I've tried learning multiple languages, but it's not my thing. I don't think. I know some strange African dialect in Wolof, but
okay.
it's not really anything that's practical to my day-to-day life.
That's rather random.
Right. I think like 40 people know that language, so it's not really.
Well,
but it doesn't really behoove me at all.
It's a very exclusive club. You do speak Kekistani, though. This is exactly why we want to speak to you. So now, how did you actually go about getting your current job? And, you know, you don't have to say too many details if you're not comfortable doing so, but because it was kind of like you were going out and filming, like, protest marches and doing periscopes on them, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, all of a sudden, it seemed from the outside, you kind of woke up one day and you'd quit your job and you were working in the alternative media. So how did that come about?
Yeah, it literally was that fast. I had watched people like Mike Cernovich, primarily actually Mike Cernovich, but a few people like Mike Cernovich. I just liked his style the best. It's something that I related to the most, and that's probably why I watched him the most. But yeah, I was doing my job, and even prior to the factory, I had held another job. I was an investigator for about 10-ish years, probably a little less than that, maybe.
Really?
Like
I didn't know that.
8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And I was an investigator, but private. It didn't have anything to do with politics per se. But I was a contracted investigator, and I just did not like that job. Like, I was good at it, and it was fun when you're younger. I just did not like it growing, when you have families, it was so thankless. I'm a positive person. You don't, in that job, a particular job that I was doing, you don't really get to see the best in people. There's not a lot of fun to be had per se. And so I left that, but then, I wanted to do a blue collar job because I felt like I had gotten away from my, I wanted to be brought down to earth, kind of start using my hands again and kind of reconnect myself, kind of ground myself. And so I started doing that, and then I was watching all these citizen journalists, Cernovich, but others, just tons of them. Now you have pretty much everybody's a journalist nowadays, it seems, which is good. But I started watching these people, and at the time, too, I was still red pilling. I've only been red pilled for maybe like 3-4 years in that terminology. I guess we can get into what red pill means later, kind of what I think it means, but I was completely oblivious to politics. 5 years ago, if you'd asked me if I was a conservative or a liberal, I would not have been able to tell you what those terms even were.
Yep.
Because that's how much I didn't care about politics. And I used that job to start, I realized really quickly that maybe this blue collar, like maybe this factory life, I was like, maybe this is a good temporary thing. Maybe this isn't a career. And I started seeing all these journalists doing their thing. And so I said, screw it. What do they have that I don't have? Well, besides college educations, and money. So but I said, screw it. We have events happening here. Might as well just go cover it. So I started doing that. I started researching and kind of seeing what was happening in our area. I started to go to them. And it just happened to be one of the first events that I ever actually covered as a journalist, journalistically. And it was kind of half-assed journalistically, too. There was an event, a free speech event that was happening in my city, and I just took my son. We just happened to be kind of driving through. I said, hey, let's just check it out. and of course Antifa was there, and everything. And I'd met someone there who later turned out to be a national story, and at the time we didn't know it was going to be, but I had met Jeremy Christian there. And for anybody who doesn't know who Jeremy Christian is, he was the Portland stabber. He killed 2 people on the Max.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course.
And I met him at that rally, and I immediately, my things were tingling, but there was a huge story there that broke that I helped break, ironically with Mike Cernovich, but that was the first real interaction with journalism, as you could say it, publicly that I'd had, and I just kind of fell ass backwards into it. It was complete serendipity, random. I didn't think I was going to get any kind of story out of it, and ended up being a national story with some pretty powerful political implication. And that was the first time I'd ever reached out to Cerno at all, and he ended up taking my story. And he was one of only a few people that would actually report honestly on what was happening from the ground, which was nice. And then nothing after that for a while. I was just kind of getting my grounds. I was working, doing some research, putting some articles together. And I found something online, some contact information, and I had sent in my job application per se. You killed. I'm sorry. I'm now reading the comments as they come in.
That's all right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you talked a lot, like now basically everyone's a citizen journalist, and this is probably one upside of the camera phone phenomenon, because if it were up to me, Tom, in all honesty, hand on heart, if I had an option to press a big red button and blow up every single camera phone on the face of the earth, I probably wouldn't hesitate in doing it, because I think it's almost killed a lot of fun in society, if that makes sense. I mean, I can't tell you how sick I am of seeing people at some kind of an event, whether it be a sporting event or, something is happening in front of them and it's a great thing, and they're watching the world through the little screen that they're holding in front of them rather than being in the moment, so to speak. They're thinking about, how good is this going to be when I throw it up on YouTube later on, instead of how good is this, and I think that's quite, it's a bit of a shame, but one upside is it takes a lot of power out of the hands of people who would otherwise, plough forth unchallenged in the creation and moulding of, say, stories and narratives in society at large. And, this is sort of where I'm getting to with the Memetics thing. And that to me is only a good thing, because more open up in that space means less control, so to speak. It's like deregulation of the media industry to a point.
Yeah, it's very interesting. They kind of left with that philosophical question: how much transparency is too much transparency? And I don't know if there really is such a thing, but it definitely does change the dynamics. And it has absolutely changed the dissemination methods and the absolute stranglehold that large corporations held over the media. And it also it helped break kind of a lot of the conditioning I think that a lot of people felt, whereas maybe they only tuned into one or two news sources. And now everyone has a camera everywhere, and it's very easy on a lot of news sources, on a lot of news stories, to kind of see that there is a spin, or maybe you're not getting the whole picture because all you have to do is jump on YouTube and type the event in, and you'll see 50 different angles. Sure.
Which is probably why they want to bring in censorship so hard of late, wouldn't you think?
Oh, it's not a question. It's not a question. In my opinion, they still hold a monopoly on the information, in an umbrella fashion, but they're definitely losing that grip. And I don't know how long the window for us is going to last before regulation, before something else happens that kind of ties our hands behind our back, journalistically speaking, or as far as narrative creation is concerned. But that's why these kind of topics and just talking about these things in general could be pretty beneficial for anybody who wants to understand the media or understand how to break a narrative or to form a new narrative, or, use the window while we have it.
Yeah, go on the attack, make hay while the sun shines. And, just before we get into our next little bit here, you sent me this little clip, and it's, for the people who don't like this show, please bear with us. It'll only go for a minute or two, but perhaps a little comedic, satirical, yet would you say fairly accurate representation of what memetics is? Tom, would that be a fair way to say?
I actually like it. I'm not a huge fan of the show, but for anybody who doesn't really know the show, The Big Bang Theory, a lot of what they talk about actually does have a root in science. They're actually pretty accurate with a lot of things, in their portrayals anyway. And when I ran across that clip, I thought it would be fun to play because it is comedic. It's looking at things in a funny light. But it also points out that the liberal, because it's primarily a liberal show, I would say, conservative,
Sure.
Politically speaking,
Yep.
It definitely leans left. And it's a good demonstration that we aren't the only one who understand memetics, and that there's really nothing new about memetics. It's only now that it's kind of become a more mainstream term, or memes have kind of become a mainstream thing, but it's actually very old, and there's people who've been studying it for a long time. And so it's interesting just to see a leading show kind of cover it. So I thought it was just kind of a very interesting take on it.
Okay. Well, let's play a couple of minutes of it, and we'll see what everyone thinks.
It's not surprising that the story has captured the attention of our little circle of friends. Are you familiar with meme theory?
I'm familiar with everything, but go on.
Meme theory suggests that items of gossip are like living things that seek to reproduce, using humans as their host.
I'm no stranger to memetic epidemiology. At Johnson Elementary School, the phrase Shelley Cooper's a smelly Cooper spread like wildfire.
I should think so. That's gold.
Oh, I had my audio down, actually. Never mind. I don't have my audio up.
Your meme hypothesis does intrigue me. How might we examine this more closely?
Do you have any ethical qualms regarding human experimentation?
It's one of the few forms of interaction with people that I don't find repellent.
We need to fabricate a tantalizing piece of gossip.
And a second non-tantalizing piece to use as a control.
Then we'll track its progress through our social group and interpret the results through the competing academic prisms of memetic theory, algebraic gossip, and epidemiology.
Look at you, getting me to engage in the social sciences. You're a vixen, Amy Farrah Fowler.
There you go. A little bit of... So we're talking basically, Tom, we're talking about old ladies gasbagging down at the salon about what Judith may be doing, and about, who say Gertrude, who's Gertrude been talking to lately, who knows who down at the school. Next thing you know, a rumour spreads like wildfire, as they said, and you've got yourself a memetic logistical nightmare. Would that be a fair way to say?
Yeah, and actually, one of my favorite aspects of that clip too is that you see the intention behind it.
Sure.
It's not something that happens by accident, and that's something that I think a lot of people I wish would understand. Mm-hmm. That there is a lot of intention behind what's happening in narratives, in media. Nothing really happens by an accident. No one ever says or spins something in an accidental way. They understand these concepts quite well, and they really do have. I mean, I can tell you, PR, which Edward Bernays said was a very politically polite way of saying propaganda, but I mean, there's a lot of intention behind everything we see, hear, and read, and I like that clip because they were showing you pre-planning. Hey, let's start a meme, let's start a rumor, we'll measure it, we'll analyze it, and because I like that they showed intention in that, because there is a ton of intention in this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was only reading an article like on one of my periscopes the other day, just for a bit of fun. Tom, you probably might have noticed. I'll just pull a few articles from the interwebs, and we'll just like dissect it line by line, and just tear it apart basically, just for shits and giggles. And it was an article in Salon about how Trump's psychological state is, well, one of the lines was from a quote-unquote respected psychiatrist that this is the greatest psychological crisis in American history and possibly the world, right? Oh, no, I'm not kidding. He did go there. And right. One of the lines was, some psychiatrists argue, it's along these lines, I'm probably butchering the quote, but it was like some psychiatrists argue that it's inappropriate to be, coming up with adjudications on President Trump's mental fitness. It's unethical. But this guy says, I don't agree with that. And I'm like, well, instead of saying some people argue that it's unethical, what they should have written, to be more accurate, is most psychiatrists understand that it is unethical. Because, you see, this is what I talk about when I talk about fake news. It's not necessarily that everything in the article is wrong or that an entire source is wrong. Often it's, a truth or a half-truth that is interwoven with a wider narrative, which then presents, a particular outcome, an emotional outcome in the reader. And oftentimes you can take the same 5-6 facts in an article, which I'm sure you're well aware, Tom, and you can probably discuss a little bit more about the mechanics of doing this, but you can take 5 or 6 facts from an article, and you can write a positive story and a negative story using the exact same facts. It's just all about how you present them.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And there's kind of a slogan I live by, and it's for people in here, it sounds like I'm being very, culturally relative, and it's because I am. This science-ish, the scaffolding of this science was primarily created by people who don't really view humans as humans in the same way that you or I do, and they don't really care about us. There's not a lot of empathy there, and so a lot of it does seem very relativistic, but it is. There is no truth with a big T in memetics, in my opinion. In the science of memetics, there's no such thing as truth with a big T. Everything is fluid, everything is dynamic, everything is changeable. And I think that's something that a lot of people overlook. It's very hard to memetically nail down anything that's true per se with a big T. Well, 100%.
Yeah. Like, I remember a couple of years ago, we had a similar, you guys have got the guys kneeling for the anthem in the American football over there. Well, a couple of years ago, there was an incident here where an Aboriginal player was getting booed at all the different grounds. And, people who were booing were saying, no, we're booing him because we don't like him as a player. And, of course, people supporting him in the media and whatnot said that they were booing because they're all racists, right? So you had an incident where one of his teammates went up, and I don't know if you're familiar with sort of Aboriginal culture or history, but like the boomerangs and the spears, and that's used a lot in dances and stuff like that. So this player, another Aboriginal, went up to the crowd and sort of motioned to throw a spear at them, and it was written up in the ABC, which is the Australian taxpayer funded news service. I'm sorry, I have to just ate a little vomit then. Pardon me. And
obviously a completely straight objective,
straight down the line. And they wrote something along the lines of, he pretended to throw a make-believe spear in the direction of the audience, right? So, and, it's just one little sentence, but to me it just highlights everything. And you could teach like an hour lecture just on that one sentence alone, because make-believe portrays a kind of, would you say, childish, almost pre-adolescent innocence to the whole thing, because fairies are make-believe, right? Santa Claus is make-believe. Fairy tales are make-believe. And a pretend spear is like, that's just feeding into that thing. So it's, he was just pretending to throw a make-believe spear. Whereas an adult way of writing it, if you were being genuine, would have been something along the lines of, he simulated throwing a spear at the crowd and not in the direction of, because again, that's kind of like a deflection, because he was standing right in front of the people, right? So, it goes from make-believe, pretending to throw a make-believe spear in the direction of the crowd. If you're writing it accurately, it would be simulated throwing a spear at the crowd. So it's one little sentence, but little things like that, if you're not aware of it, when you get to the end of the article and they're loaded up, one on top of the other, 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 you can come out at the bottom thinking everything's peachy and rainbows.
Oh, yeah, it's not a question. So basically, in that sense, what they're doing is they're using terminology, they're using a vocabulary which undercuts the credibility of whatever was happening, and then they're also picking vocabulary that is very absorbable, it's very palpable to their readership.
Sure.
And I don't know if that is saying that all people who listen to that or read that news station maybe need to refresh a little bit, but that's in my opinion, that's definitely what the undercut of that sentence would be, and I could definitely see.
Well,
I definitely see that being used all the time.
Yeah.
Those tactics are being used everywhere.
They're also arming the reader, right? Or you could say empowering. Now we're playing their game, right? Now you're empowering the reader. They're arming the reader to at the first sign of, say, a dinner party argument, to say, "Oh, you're making a big thing out of it." Right? Don't stop making a big thing out of it. What are you, racist? Like that kind of thing. It's already gearing them towards that kind of spewy, programmable output when they head off into the big bad world and meet with the other so-called humans.
Well, because they understand the science, and it is a science. They understand the science of getting people to just regurgitate rhetorical talking points on cue. It's very Pavlovian. And there's, for instance, there's a few different kinds of memes that can do this, but in my opinion, one of the memes they're using there is called an association meme. So immediately when you think of that situation, the reason why they start off with that is because they want you to associate that event with that language that they specifically use, pretending, it's an association meme. So now when you think of that event, you've automatically in your brain associated it with that spin.
Sure. Can you think of perhaps any, we'll try and stick to America, and it's just been a gold mine for memeology, would you say, in the last couple of years? And I'm quite pleased that, if nothing else, the sort of well-documented, very obvious and overt, would you say, self-shredding sacrifice of the mainstream media has led to so many more people paying attention to this kind of thing. And I think, again, that's only a good thing if you can engage with, say, a written piece or a documentary on a certain level that goes beyond just, the kind of how they tickle your emotional fancy, so to speak, when you're reading it. If you can get beyond that level and actually analyze the language and what they're trying to put to you, then I think you're probably ahead of the curve. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, it's interesting in the information we have. One of the other things that this kind of, with the internet age in general, is the rate at which speed is disseminated and is available.
Sure.
And that factor in itself, the fact that basically time isn't existent anymore, the time itself doesn't exist in memetics pretty much at all anymore. And where historically it used to be very important, where if you were to go back throughout history, if you wanted to send a message to a town, if you wanted to spread propaganda or a news story or something to a town, you'd have to send it a horse, and then as fast as the horse could get there, and then maybe by train, and then by vehicle, and that all took time, which was all part
pigeon.
Of that. Right, and that all took time, which was a very powerful part of that equation. But now that it's instantaneous and time has been removed from that equation, I think that's why you're seeing a huge surge in this kind of memetic. I mean, just everything that's happening in narratives, with narratives fall apart, with they're not lasting, they're not as spreading in the same way that normal propagandists have been using for hundreds of years, technically thousands of years, really. And so that lack of time being an extremely important variable to memetics, and it still is, just not in the same way, because you still want to get your idea before someone else gets it to someone. But the fact that it's so readily available via social media and other online platforms, it's just insane how much that's changed the equation. But I think this is exactly what's happening. People now are starting to realize that they don't have to rely on a sluggish media system in order to put a story out, and anybody can be a journalist, everyone can have a blog, anyone can share a video, and it's been explosive, to say the least. That's, in my opinion, arguably one of the most important factors for, say, the election of Donald Trump, with the just absolute decimation of the mainstream media in the U.S. But it's happening globally too. It's not just a national thing. It's a global phenomenon that's happening, and I don't know how long that's going to last before they figure out some way to put a quash on that,
or hijack it.
Right. Oh, it's already, for sure. I mean, there's already groups, entities, agencies in which are already kind of co-opting this whole thing, but it's so open now. It's gonna be a whole new paradigm, a whole new spectrum.
Sure. Let me bounce a theory off you and see what you think, Tom. A couple of my mates and we came up with this thing a few years ago, and this is, I don't pretend to be any kind of doyen when it comes to this stuff. We were just a few guys who used to have these conversations long before any sort of Trump phenomenon or anything came about. It's just that we never actually thought to, say, pick up a microphone and tell anybody else about it. You know, it was just kind of conversations that you would have, say, down at the pub or at work or that kind of thing. So we came up with this thing a few years ago called the 48-hour theory. Now, someone's probably already written a book about it that I'm not aware of. But so if I'm plagiarizing, please, bear with me. Don't hang me. So
I'm going to hold you to a very high.
You never know.
I'm an internet troll. Excuse me. I have standards.
Of course. I'm not sure what the Kekistani ruling is on these kinds of matters. I think battle to the death with salad tongs, I think that might be somewhere in the Constitution, but I'm not sure. So, when a major event happens, and particularly in politics, we tend to invoke the 48-hour rule, and it's based on this, that what you'll have in from ground zero, say, let's call it, for the first 48 hours, you'll have the various competing interests all vying for your attention. So if you can picture yourself walking through a shopping mall and people out the front of each shop going, come into my shop, no, he definitely shot her, it was done on purpose, you need to come in my shop, I've got the goods. And then there's a guy across the mall saying, no, don't listen to that guy, come into my shop, it was a complete accident, he didn't mean to do it, the gun just went off, that kind of thing. So they kind of jostle for your attention in the first 48 hours, and whichever one grasps the most people in that time period, they're the ones that tend to drive the conversation for the next week, 2 weeks. But the tragedy of it is, Tom, even if they're wrong and facts come to light after that first 48 hours where it's just kind of chaotic and a lot of speculation, when facts come to light after that, it's too late, because the first 48 hours, the idea or the meme has already been embedded in the population, and by that point they just fill in the gaps themselves, and you can't actually bring anything to light to them, because that original meme, that's the power of it, the gossip has so been cemented in that first 48-hour period that you really struggle getting through to them. Is that an accurate representation of, would you say, of the last couple of years at least when it comes to news?
Yeah, for sure. And I would actually say that timeline is decreasing in a rate I wouldn't have said, even I didn't really see coming.
Okay.
We've had, just since I've been kind of putting out media and been studying the cycles professionally now, we used to run on a 48-hour, that's probably pretty spot on actually. Then it started going to a 24-hour, and now I would say, and I don't know if it's an attention span thing per se or how that works, but you're probably rocking an 8 or 12-hour window in which to start formulating the opinions in the public. And there's a few ways you can combat that after the fact, but yeah, I would say it's even shortened now with how fast information is available. And it's not just that information is available, it's how much comes out so quickly. So before, you had time, you were competing with only a few people, but now that you're competing with everybody on the internet who has an opinion, I would say probably about 8-12 hours max is when you have the time, the window in which to make the impact to sway someone before they just get flooded with information and it becomes almost overwhelming, and they'll almost just tune out because it's so overwhelming.
It's an interesting question you raise. Like, is it a short attention span thing? Like, because, I think you're quite right. The 24-hour news. Well, if I can just, I'll be a bit more traditional. The 24-hour news cycle to me is almost like cancer to politics, because, we tend to think that like it hurts them, but in reality, they know that whatever happens today that's bad, we can easily wash it off the front page by tomorrow. And if we're talking like an 8-hour period, is it a short attention span thing, or is it deliberate, using of the, the social media weapon? Because I noted someone's comment in the chat there just before, that's why Yahoo's just about headlines. And I'll tell you, they've done studies. They know that most people read the headline and maybe one or two of the top paragraphs, and then they flick it away, and then they build the rest themselves. They kind of build the story on their own. That's why you'll see, whenever there's like a really negative article, any kind of balance comments are usually saved for the last 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it's just like 1 or 2 lines, because they know most people who go for the headline aren't getting that far down the article. So, I just wonder, just out of curiosity, is it a short attention span thing, or is it like a kind of like a weaponized thing by people who want us to be led down certain rabbit holes rather than stay on one topic for too long?
I'd say it's both, and I've actually covered this on my scopes as well, where you have a symptom, and the symptom, and I mean, there's probably a litany of reasons why this is a symptom, but a symptom in our society right now of other issues is a very short attention span. And I can tell you, because I write the articles, that, and I can see how people read them, and it's a fact that almost no one reads an article. Almost no one. Like, statistically speaking, a vast majority of people will not read the full article.
Sure.
And that, I use this tactic myself, again, in Memetics. It's very important, that first initial impression. When I write an article and I choose an image, usually I create them. Most of my images are created memes by me. And I specifically, it's very deliberate. My image is chosen.
We've just got a couple on the screen now, Tom, while you're talking. So, what is a soy boy? And we've got...
Yeah, those are infographics. Yeah, so... Yep. And there's a few in there that I've done, and if you were to look back, if you see on the right hand side, there's some other ones. Almost all those memes are created by me.
Okay.
And yeah, I know for a fact that almost no one reads the full article.
Sure.
Ali says he doesn't read the full article. So the headline is important as well as the images. If there's going to be an image, you have to make it something catchy, and you have to be able to portray a message effectively with an image and with a headline, because, like you said, and like everyone knows who understands media, behind the scenes, that if you write a 4,000-word expose, no one's going to read that. The percentage of people who are actually going to read and understand exactly what you wrote is very small.
Yeah,
and
that's kind of like why the national reviews of the world, although they do write some dynamite stuff from time to time, and that's kind of why I think they're probably less influential now than they've ever been before. It's just, an attention span thing. People tend to speed read, and they kind of get their news, like you said earlier, from like the Twitter and the Facebook types. Who's going to go out now and buy a magazine or a newspaper and sit down and read like the long form articles? Like, I like it, but I'm not silly enough to think that everyone else should like it too. That it doesn't work that way, right?
Well, yeah, and it's very interesting. The other thing that kind of influences is there's, like we already touched on earlier, the amount of video content, the amount of, our society, and this is a worldwide thing. I don't think this is just a national thing, although in the United States it's definitely very, very apparent. We live in a instant gratification culture. They want the answer now, and they don't want to wait, and they don't want to read, they don't want to work. They want the information summed up, 5 words delivered to them. They want their full political opinion to be formed on that precise statement. And you're seeing media shift quite a bit to combat this, or to try to capitalize on this. It's detrimental, I would say. It's kind of not a good sign. It's not a great symptom of a society when they can't read 500 words.
Sure.
But yeah, for sure, 100%. That's why I make my images the way I make them. That's why it's completely intentional. That's why I headline things in a certain way. If there's an article, so for instance, if an article were to come out and says, whatever the article is, and I disagree with that point, memetically speaking, and I do objective journalism, and I also don't do objective journalism. I'm not going to be the person that's going to tell you I write only objective stuff. I don't. I have an opinion. I make sure it's in there, and I'm pretty open about exactly what my opinion is. And it's pretty, usually by my headline, it's pretty, it's easy to see.
Sure.
I just lay it out on there. I'm not trying to be, on most of my articles, I'm not trying to be super, super objective. But yeah, that's why it's super important. It's a very strange time we find ourselves in, where more information is available to everybody at a split second. And not only are you working on a shorter window for the media narrative before the next story is pushed by, either mainstream media or something that is going to cover up the story, that's going to shift the public attention. and you're working on not just an 8-hour cycle, you're working on 30 seconds. If you have someone's attention for 30 seconds, you gotta hook them. And if you don't, then you might as well not even write the article.
Yeah, they're gone. They're away. They're finished because someone else is just down the road waiting to hook them in instead of you, and they'll just latch onto that instead. You know, there's no coming. That's the other thing too. I think there's probably a lot less loyalty now with sources than there used to be. You know, before people would be like, no, I only buy this one newspaper and that's all I read, and everyone else is a bastard. But now I think you find, you know, people are a lot more willing to say, you know, to an extent, I don't think cross over to the other side, so to speak, but they're more willing to dabble in sources that perhaps, you know, the unverified of the journalistic world, if you know what I mean. Like, hey, I just came across this blog and it makes sense to me, so I'm going to put that out there. Whereas before, maybe even only, say, 2 or 3 years ago, people would have been perhaps unsure whether or not they should share certain things that they've found simply because they would have got back from all of their friends or whatever, oh, what's this crap? It's not even mainstream. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And this is actually a problem that's pretty pervasive. And I know we hear a lot right now in you know, national media in the United States, but about trolls and bots and this and that and fake news. And that's a meme that they put out that we then basically co-opted and counterpunched them with. But I see this is a across the political spectrum problem. This is a across the political spectrum phenomenon. It isn't just liberals and it that fall victim to this. I know people who are conservatives who, you know, claim to be able to source out fake news, and I see them on, say, Twitter sharing fake news all the time, like a fake news article all the time.
Sure.
And usually I can tell just by looking at the picture on the headline if the article is going to be good or not, if it's going to have any kind of substance to it. And there's so much happening right now where since anybody can put information out there, it's very apparent that a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum aren't vetting most of the information they get, because if you make it anywhere, you know, if you make it 100 words into some of these articles, you're like, there's no way this is true at all. Like, they're not even trying to make this believable. And yet I see people who allegedly, you know, who believe they have a reputation for honesty, and it's not like they're doing it maliciously necessarily, but who are falling victim to that and sharing the story because the headline and the picture fits their narrative, regardless of what information. In fact, I've even seen people share articles that when I click on them, the article says, by the way, you are 1 in 10 who actually clicked on this article, and the article isn't anything about what the headline is. I've actually seen that written.
Wow.
And I think
one
that's
of the
hilarious.
Suckers. Yeah. Well, Chan recently, they had a few victories in this area, didn't they, with coming up with fake feminism hoaxes. But see, the beauty of what they were doing was, and I've tried to explain this to, would you say, perhaps some more progressive friends that I have. You know, I'll share an article with them, and even I think, wow, this is a bit out there. And they'll come back at me and say, well, is this a hoax? Is this fake? And I say, well, see, this is the tragedy of it. This is basically parroting your belief system here, your political belief system, and you can't even tell whether it's fake or not. Do you see what I'm saying? So, like, you know, that's the great shame here. Like, this is how ridiculous, and then I'll use it as an attack point, Tom. You'll see, like, I'll say, now, see, this is the problem, right? It's like you've gone so far liberal that you can't even tell if arguments that are presenting your side of the story are true or not, like, or if someone's making it up to try and make it look ridiculous. You don't know if it's too ridiculous to be true or not. And this is, maybe you need to reassess where you're at politically if you can't even tell whether the stories like that are coming out on your side are true or if someone's just making fun of you. Like, that's a tragedy, right?
And it's actually really funny, and you see this too. With one of the things I can think of on Twitter it was kind of a thing now, and pretty much everyone, I hope, at this point knows. Like, for instance, there was the Antifa groups, which almost everyone knows who Antifa is, even though, say, like, CNN would never report on it.
Even down here in little old Australia, we've got a few running around.
Yeah, but then you'd see the troll accounts, the parody accounts of Antifa come up.
Yes.
And by the way, if you guys haven't found any, like, Laguna Beach Antifa,
yep,
or like some really hoity-toity area Antifa, it's hilarious. And I've seen liberals share an Antifa post from one of these parody Antifa accounts as if it's a real Antifa post. I've seen conservatives do it too, but I have seen, I mean, it's just insane to me that
Mar-a-Lago Antifa, we got to be there. We're burning neckties. Yeah.
Some of the stuff they put out is so ridiculous. And it's funny for someone like me who's kind of trolly. I like trolling. I find it hilarious, although it is kind of a symptom of probably a deeper, more serious issue going on within our culture and our society. But I see that stuff all the time, and you know, it really shows the double-edged sword that is a transparent society. Everyone wants transparency in media, they want transparency in politics, but then when they start getting transparency at the levels they've never really seen before, it absolutely is. It's such a window. It's such a window, I don't know, philosophically or politically speaking, into culture a little bit when they see behind the veil and see how people react to it.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some. We're being touched by one of, you know, speak of the devil. We're being touched by one now. Someone just came in and said, you are trash, the poorly educated love Trump. Well, you know, it's reciprocal, because you do remember he said, I love the poorly educated. And that's a lot better than saying, you know, you need to be down in the basement playing with yourself and you're deplorable and a racist. So, you know, if you reach out with a little love, you'll probably get a little love in return. Now, if you don't mind, friendly troll, I'm going to break into a banjo solo with my 6 fingers any minute now. So feel free to vacate the premises or sit back and enjoy a hoedown, because that's
we were talking about this on one of the other scopes and I had said that shitposting sometimes is useful.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know what shitposting is, that's just where you just go and right, you just go and just spew random shenanigans at people to try to trigger them, or to try to enable and try to try to suss a reaction out of them.
Yeah.
And this is actually a tool that I've used myself and that friends have used while trolling. There's actually a technical reason why people do this. Some people are just dumb, and in fact, a lot of people are just dumb, and that's basically all they can come up with. But
I've got to admit, before you give it, I want you to explain like the technical use of it. But I've got to admit, I tend to be on the side where I'm like, you know, if trolling's good, it's good, you know, and when it's just like crap like that, it's just like, oh man, it's just not even. It's like, don't even try, you know, don't get out of bed in the morning for that kind of shit, right? But you know, I will defer to your superior knowledge in this area. So
see,
please.
and it's true, but it depends, and again, it all comes back to intention. In memetics and in trolling, in any of this kind of science, this kind of realm of practice, intention is everything. And we used to call, back in some of my troll crews, we used to call it piggybacking. I don't know if there's a more technical term for it, but where we would troll in multiples, in groups. You know, obviously, like they have the troll raids now, where you just have a whole bunch of shit posters that will group up and they'll go troll someone's account in a mass, and that's one thing, and it can be useful again. But I've used this thing called piggybacking. So, for instance, it's all about intention. What do I want to do? Why do I want to troll this person? Either they're saying something I like or I don't like, but I do want to capture their attention. I do want them to acknowledge me one-on-one, and I may want to change their minds or the minds of their viewers. And a shit-posting troll is fantastic, and I've used them in the past, whether most of the time they have nothing to do with me, but I have used them. I've piggybacked off of them. So, for instance, if there's someone doing a Periscope and it's about a subject I completely disagree with, I'll sometimes, before I comment, I'll wait for a shit poster to come in and start unloading their ridiculousness, and then I'll use that. I'll be like, wow, get a load of this guy over here. And even if I disagree politically or philosophically with who's ever talking, now, because of that shit poster, I've been able to use them to build common ground somewhere.
Sure. Okay. Would you say maybe, can I throw this one at you? I don't know how familiar you are with the term realpolitik. I assume you're very familiar with it. And one of the tactics you would use in, say, would you say student elections and stuff like that, or say local council elections, right? And you're having a debate in front of people, you will plant someone on the other side of the debating team. And what you'll do is make an argument for their side, but you'll make it so ridiculous and over the top that their own people start to abandon them because they say, I can't support this, right? But you're doing it, you're sort of genuinely lying, if that makes sense. So just say you and I are having a debate and you think that there should be a tax on sugary treats, right? Then I'll come up and I'll back up your point, and then I'll move into the area of, say, banning ice cream because it's the only moral thing to do, right? And you can't come out and say, well, no, that's wrong, because you can't have a debate on your own side of the debate. However, the people who were supporting you all of a sudden then start thinking, hang on, these guys are fucked out and whacked out of their brains. You know, like, I'm not supporting, you know, no sugar I could go with, but that's a little bit too far. So is that where you're getting at, like this kind of shit posting, like piggybacking?
Right. That's the term we always called it. I don't know if there's actually a technical term for that. Maybe I should look it up. But that's what we always called it, where we would want, when you're using a technique, you have an intention to either sway someone's minds, or a lot of times, you're not going to say change the broadcaster's mind, or the writer of the article. But what people don't realize is there's a crowd watching that.
Yep.
And the crowd is more important than the speaker. I don't care if the speaker believes what I believe. In fact, he probably won't. He's already set in his beliefs. He has his own agenda. But those people who are watching are still forming their opinions. And if you can use shitposting or piggybacking or, like you said, the realpolitik strategy, and there's nothing new about this either. I mean, this is as old as politics is. You know, like they've been doing this since debate was first a thing, before when people were arguing about whatever.
Wearing togas and sandals, wandering around, some kind of courtyard eating grapes, Tom. They were doing it back then, you know? Like, you're right, it's not new. It's just been adapted, perhaps, like, you know, for our TV dinner-style society with short attention spans, and it's been adapted and maybe laser-focused so it can hit more people more directly, more often, more of the time, rather than going on like a 10-hour soliloquy and using those techniques. But
right, and the attention span issue also plays into this. You have to make something outrageous. You have to make it outrageous or seemingly outrageous, or that it can be taken in an outrageous way. At the same time, it should be short. It should be to the point, because you only have someone's attention for a very fraction, a very minute amount of time in order to relay the message, to build common ground, even if your aim is just to further the conversation later on. And I've used this tactics before. So, for instance, one story I have that I've told quite a few times on my Periscope, but there was I got into a troll battle between me and one of the, I don't know if you'd call them leaders of Antifa, but someone that had some kind of sway in some of the Antifa activities in my area. And I got into a beef with them intentionally. I had no intention of changing their mind at all. I knew I wasn't going to. But what I was saying and the way I was talking, the intention behind what I was saying, was not to change their mind or catch their attention per se. It was to, I say per se a lot. Someone said that in the comments. You're right. I just noticed it. Was to let the audience see me saying these things. And if you choose your dissemination methods, if you choose your vocabulary to fit that audience, even if you fundamentally disagree with what that audience believes, they will reach out to you. And this happened to me. So I was trolling this guy. I knew no way, shape, or form was I going to convert him. But people were watching, and I had a person reach out to me from that Antifa group who said, hey, I saw what you were saying, and, please don't tell anybody that I'm talking to you, because they will turn on me.
Tainted love.
But I am very interested in what you were talking about. And I got into contact with that person, and he said, is there some kind of book that you could recommend or something that I could read in order to kind of familiarize myself with your opinion or what you're talking about a little bit? And then even then, I specifically chose a book. I chose The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay.
And it's not exactly, I wouldn't say that's exactly a conservative book, but it's good introduction level for someone a lot of times. So I recommended that book, and I actually gave him that book. I lent that book to him, and he read it, and he changed since then. He's still pretty liberal, but he has changed his mindset a lot. He doesn't associate with Antifa in the same way. However, he was absolutely terrified of facing backlash from people who allegedly had the very same ideology as him. It was very interesting, but it can be useful. I would tell people too, especially if you're trolling or if you're trying to use memetics, you need to learn the language of your target audience. Don't think you're going to convince a liberal by talking about fiscal responsibility.
Sure.
It's not going to happen. Choose your vocabulary. Study your mark. Study your enemy, your rival, whatever you want to call them, your political adversary. Study the way they talk, study their language, and use it, because you will have a way better success if you do that.
Yeah, I mean, debt and deficit and personal liberty, these aren't sexy terms anymore, are they? Really, let's be honest. What I thought you said was interesting there, like, it actually made me think of maybe a bit of a flip side about, again, with the short attention span thing. But what we've seen maybe in the last 2, 3, 4 years is people perhaps yearning for more. And I find more and more people now say, say for instance, your Stefan Molyneux, right, who's incredibly popular. And he will do 2-3 hour shows sometimes, whether he's just talking to people, he'll talk to one person for an hour and a half, or he'll do like a detailed breakdown of a particular topic, or, sit down and speak with someone for maybe over an hour and a half. And I find like that kind of format is growing in popularity because, part of me thinks there's maybe a subsection, and, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe there's a subsection of society now that's just kind of sick of the little 5-minute grabs on the news. I mean, because you can watch the mainstream news, right? And they might have an interesting guest, like, say, a Scott Adams on, but they'll ask them 4 questions, and then it's, okay, we've got to go to the break. And the thinking person doesn't necessarily get anything out of that, whereas these long sort of podcasts and videos, like an hour and a half conversation between 2 intelligent people, they're getting more and more popular. Like maybe people are getting bored with everyone treating them like they're really bored, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to use a liberal term, useful idiot is what comes to mind. So I would say, and this is true, kind of what's happening with our current, just insanely paced media cycles and stuff, is you are seeing that for sure. You're seeing people get grabbed by that, but by the the 5-minute quips and the instant gratification. But at the same time, depending on what you're talking about, the people who end up listening, if you can make it palpable in a way that the people end up listening to a majority of the podcast, whether they be liberal or conservative, the people who do that will be better allies than any of the other people on any side of the political spectrum that only tuned in for 5 minutes, and they're actually more useful at affecting a longer lasting social change. They're actually more active in that sense, ideologically, sociologically speaking.
Is that because they get more engaged and they research their own stuff off the back of it, and then it builds like a kind of interest, or?
Right, and it's very interesting. You'll even see this, for instance, Joe Rogan is one of the biggest podcasters on the internet. Now, yep. I know he says he's a libertarian, primarily he's a libertarian, but almost all of his guests are liberal in some way. They would probably classify themselves as liberals, and yet he still has one of the most popular podcasts on the internet, and his podcast will go 4 hours, and his viewership and his download rates are insane, and it's about dissemination there. He uses facts and, humor too, but the way that he breaks it down to his guests, it's intriguing and it's a discussion. And a lot of people right now, especially right now, with how divisive, and I've experienced this myself, so I'm just speaking out of personal, I basically don't have any patience for the back and forth left versus right narrative. It's just exhausted to me. I immediately lose interest. And those long-form discussions, that's where you're going to garner your support that's actually going to stick with you. And if you want to use memetics, if you want to put out a meme, if you want to try to start something, those are going to be the ones. If you wanted to say, like, lieutenants per se, to put it in a... Damn it, I said per se again. To put it in... Now that someone pointed out, like...
We're going to keep a tally. We're going to keep a tally. And every time per se gets mentioned, we take $1 away from charity.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, metaphorically, take a shot every time, and then we'll see how many are left at the end of the podcast. But Yeah, those long-form discussions, we see people stuck in their political echo chamber on the left and the right, and it's very apparent. It's not like the right is immune to this. They're still there.
Oh, definitely.
But that center area where even you could be conservative and still be in the center, where you still haven't shut off, you still haven't shut the door to your own echo chamber, it's still growing and you're still forming a long-term opinion, those are the ones that will stick around for that long-term discussion. And those are also the ones that are useful when trying to disseminate messages effectively over, say, the 5-second instant gratification person.
Yeah, and it's funny too because, I always thought, you want to read more of stuff that you disagree with, just for no other reason. Like, I don't need to have my own opinion parroted back to me, if that makes, like, you want to keep sharp, you want to keep your eye in, so to speak. So you want to peruse stuff that you find objectionable politically as often as possible, for no other reason than to understand why you find it objectionable, right? Because otherwise, how would you know if you're on the right track or not? Because if, I know you don't like the left-right thing. The only thing I would say to the left-right thing is what I found in my experience, and it could be wrong, and it could be like just really nuanced and personalized, right? But I found the tendency, the propensity towards people on the left to defend the team, and people on the right tend to defend the individual. And that maybe that goes like just cuts to a deeper collectivist versus individualist mindset. But I'm seeing that less and less now because, like, if I attack a Democrat, oftentimes Democrats, even though they might not necessarily like that person in particular, they will defend them like they're defending the whole team. And they'll say, yes, but what about the Republicans? And I say, guys, I want to sack half of the Republicans too. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a team thing, it's an individual thing. But when you attack a Democrat, there's a tendency there for people to go, well, don't, leave us alone. It's our team's good, your team's bad. And I agree with you there. That's the infuriating part of the left-right paradigm. Although I'm starting to see that just chip away now, like more and more Democrats are tending towards at least having the ability to, highlight one of their own and send them off, rather than getting that real team, that D-based team mentality and acting like drawing a line in the sand, so to speak. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah, without question. And it's actually, I think that's one of the main reasons why I'm pretty optimistic about this whole situation. No matter how crazy this political shit show gets, this cultural shit show gets, it is really apparent to me that for whatever reason, I would say it's probably just at this point due to like some form of mental fatigue, where it's just people are getting so turned off with all the vitriol that the windows are opening up. And I've said this, if I was going to try to wake someone up, quote unquote, or red pill someone, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it would have been vastly more difficult for me to do so.
Yep.
Even someone that was coming from the complete opposite side of the political spectrum than I am. Now, like with a few key chosen words, a few, a well formulated or practiced delivery dissemination method, it's become infinitely easier to have these conversations. You still have the extreme left and the other extreme left, which would be the extreme right. You still have them there, but there's such a minority of people, and there's so many people that just genuinely don't harbor any of these crazy, collectivist ideologies, that the window is there, and it's right. It's just all about choosing your words carefully, choosing how you want to interact with people, and it's also about listening. I don't think a lot of people realize one of the most important things about trolling successfully is the ability to listen to the other person. In fact, I would say almost you can get farther with someone whether you want to change their political, philosophical ideology to something more like your own, or just have them be more open-minded. If you're able to listen to someone and just let them spew their whatever and just listen to them and say, maybe that's a good point, or, I respect that opinion. If you were just listen to people, you will find that you were able to change their minds infinitely easier.
Sure. I think a comment I made to you in the aftermath of we went from Roy Moore to Conyers, right? And you had a little periscope on there. But just before the Conyers part, you were talking about Roy Moore, and maybe we can get into a little bit of this. The danger here for people on the right, the Republicans, right? And, you know exactly where I'm going with this. And I said to you, there is a big, big, big opportunity in this time right now to cleave off huge amounts of Democrat voters. And people just need to realise that and not fuck it up, basically, by going, say, all in and going too militant on perhaps this one angle. And, because like we said, little t truth at the beginning, right? And, small truths wrapped in around bigger stories and whatnot. You're really putting your nuts on the chopping block, so to speak, if you go all in at this particular time. And this was the first 48 hours. I mean, it was a recipe for disaster, like from the get-go. He seems to have come through the other end relatively unscathed, but all the ingredients were there, Tom, for like a real shitstorm to blow up in the faces of the MAGA movement, so to speak. So maybe tell us a little bit what you thought about that whole situation.
Yeah, and no question. And when that story first broke, it was an interesting story for me because he had such grassroots support that I knew it was going to be messy. But when I saw that story, I didn't think it was a hit job on Roy Moore. I thought it was a hit job on the media. It was a hit job on the narrative that we have right now, that we had, and all the victories you were having. It really, to be honest, in my opinion, didn't have anything to do with Roy Moore per se, big picture.
Yeah, that's an actually really interesting angle. So, yeah, please go into that and explain your thinking there a bit for us.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the charges or the accusations, whatever, that's very serious, very poignant. But the whole concept of what they were doing, I don't think, was to smear more and more. In fact, if that was their long-term outcome, then they failed because it didn't work.
No, it didn't.
It actually backfired on them. And
well, he got a standing ovation, didn't he, the next day when it all broke? Standing ovation, extra 10 points in the polls. It was like, holy shit, that didn't work out the way we thought.
Right, and I knew that was probably going to be the case as soon as I read the story. And again, read the 4,000-word expose from the Washington Post, because almost no one wrote it. They read it. They read the as we were talking. They read the 100-word, 300-word snippets,
exactly.
The opinion pieces. No one read the actual journalism that was going on there. And yes, there was actual journalism there. Although I'm not saying that WAPO didn't weaponize that story. There's a difference between weaponizing something and the facts of the story.
Sure.
But that whole concept to me, as soon as I saw it, I smelled a trap right away. And it was personal for me because I've been talking to, say, victims of sexual abuse in Hollywood. I've talked to Corey Feldman's team. I've broken stories on pedophilia in Hollywood. I've been talking to these people, most of which, by the way, aren't conservative. So for anybody thinking that, that there's a political aspect there, it isn't. Most of them aren't conservative. In fact, most of them are very hardcore liberals who hate Trump. But we had a very strange window there when the left and the right on the grassroots level, in the people's mind, was actually pretty united on one front, and that was combating sexual abuse, that was talking about these subjects that are plaguing our society in a way, and there's such a chilling effect on our words, that it was bringing people together. I had liberals hitting me up who probably wouldn't normally talk to me just because of my political associations, but because they saw that I was putting out real stories and I was genuinely talking about issues, regardless of political affiliation, they were reaching out to me. And as soon as I saw that story, I said, crap, they're coming after the conservative media.
Yep.
And as soon as I saw it, I was like, dang. And I noticed the effect right away. The sources I was talking to, they became more less open.
Wow.
They're more timid to discuss things. Well, because
they saw a big shiny bear trap there just under the reeds, right? Like,
absolutely.
Don't go walking around here because snap, they're going to just cut you off. The conservative media is going to slander you, and you can't trust those bastards. Look, they're just the same.
Right, and it sucks because I wish people understood this a little more. It's not necessarily, and the reason, that story, for a lot of reasons, is just so toxic, but the long-term effects of that and how people reacted, and I wish people on the MAGA movement and the conservative movement would understand this better, this rule of narrative, it's, for lack of a better word, the game we're playing here, and the long-term game, not the surface-level stuff, but if the MAGA movement would have handled that a little differently, and I think it's still salvageable at this point, but if they would have handled that a little bit differently, for one, if a story, for instance, if a story were to come out like that, regardless of whether it's true or it's not, the first person you do not attack is the victim.
Yep.
And so many people, even people who I respect as journalists or people in the mainstream, the first thing they did was start attacking the victim and trying to discredit the victim. And this is a problem. You know, the alleged victim, you know, so I don't trigger people, the alleged victim or victims.
You know, we're not talking about pretend victims here. Like, we're not talking about, you know, someone who faints at a Milo rally because they've heard offensive speech, right? We're talking allegedly about, and, you know, isn't this whole blaming the victim thing, isn't that what we get so upset about, right?
Oh, I mean, it's not a question. How many people, and I'm talking to Juanita Broaddrick this week. We'll be interviewing Juanita Broaddrick this week. And how many people do you know that attack Juanita Broaddrick on the liberal media? Hillary Clinton was, you know, she's known for this. Conservatives hate her for this.
Oh, it was rampant, Tom. My friend Ted Dabrowski just came in. Sorry to interrupt. He's been showing me, you know, article after article after article, news reports, everything from the 1990s when the Clinton stuff was coming out. Bill Clinton we're talking about here. And, you know, all of these women are just whores. They just want fame, you know. It was relentless, right? Relentless attacking. So, like you said, there was a chance there, and maybe it didn't go as far as it could have possibly have gone for the same thing to happen in reverse in regards to Roy Moore, right?
Yeah, it was actually, you know, a very uncomfortable bellwether.
Yep.
Because, you know, it showed me that there is still some work to be done with kind of educating people on how this works and how the long game here of social narratives work. And yeah, I mean, it was, when I saw that, I knew that was their goal, and I knew it was actually going to be effective for the most part. I think I've still kept most of my sources because I've talked to them. You know, they understand my aims. I'm pretty transparent with what that I don't really care about political ideology when it comes to most of these stories. But in general, as soon as I saw, I'd see people in the conservative movement that would, like, on Thursday, make a post about how evil Hillary Clinton is for covering up or for smashing victims like Juanita Broaddrick, and then the next day, the very first thing they would do is start smashing on the alleged victim about how many times she'd been married.
And it's like, oh no, don't do that. Like, can you not go back 24? Surely the 24-hour news cycle hasn't, turned your brain to custard that quickly. Surely, Right, and in the game of narratives and in the game of trying to maintain some kind of moral high ground here, there's a lot of people, in my opinion, who really stepped on it now, because if something happens later in the future, their credibility among a lot of people is, once it's out on the internet, it's out there, and they will be able to have a lot of information used against them, or their viewpoints used against. It's just going to make it more difficult in general to keep our momentum. Sure. And in this game, momentum is everything. Yeah. If you lose momentum, you might as well reformulate a whole new strategy, because you're not going to be going very far. Well, we've got the perfect example here, don't we, of the modern day Democrat Party. I mean, I did a video like maybe 8 months before the election, Tom, about why the Democrats are failing, and you've essentially got, three elderly Marxist type shrieking women who are stuck in an ideology born out of the 60s that's just not relevant anymore to modern day people. And all they can do is just keep doing the same thing over and over and over, and they get stuck, right? So they need to reform. So that's your living, breathing example there. If you screw up the narrative, and if you turn it toxic and people turn against you, then you may as well just step away from the game, reformulate a new strategy. I mean, if I'm being perfectly unbiased here, Tom, I would have said that rather than going on the Russia story, and rather than going down all the little roads that the Democrats have done over the last 12 months, regardless of any, say, inherent truth value in them, they would have been far better served going back, keeping quiet for a while, and formulating a strategy and a policy base to re-engage with the people who left them in places like the Rust Belt states.
Oh, I mean, it's not a question, and this specifically, it's just a perfect example with Roy Moore. there's so many people who voted for Trump that were Democrats. And that's always something it's overlooked. Not a lot of people talk about, especially on the left. They don't like to recognize that. But a ton of Democrats who voted for Obama twice voted for Trump in this election. And there's a reason for that. And that is, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won. It gave him a clear edge. And if I was the liberal media and I wanted to remove that edge, the story, like Roy Moore's story, weaponized in the same way that they did it, would help me to bridge that gap and win those voters back over, because it paints a polarizing picture that a lot of Democrats, maybe middle of the ground Democrats or undecided Democrats or independents now could use as a pivoting point to start coming back to our party, which is, in shambles. And as soon as I saw it, I said they're going after the Democratic voters with the story. It's not just a victim. They're, obviously if they're, the stories are factual, all these kinds of things, then that needs to be taken care of. But on the bigger narrative, I saw that, and I think they were actually quite successful at getting a little bit of an ideological pivot there. And I think that story and the way that the conservatives handled it and the way that the media, the quote-unquote conservative media handled it, really probably helped them earn a lot of voters back. And I mean, that's where these things, where it's not just a game of narrative per se, but that, damn it, I said it again. But I'm gonna have to get a substitute word now.
Yeah, one less African child gets to eat today, ladies and gentlemen, thanks to Tom Shadilay per se.
But there is actual real world implications. I mean, very direct implications of these things happening, and a lot of people don't understand the very abstract, obtuse nuances of how this narrative, how this game works.
Yep.
And a lot of them fall victims to these psychological tricks, and you can't really blame them for that. But that's why informing people of how this game is played and letting them have the tools, the same tools that these mainstream media outlets, that this quote unquote deep state, that this establishment has used since primarily the founding of our country, but even goes much further than that. Every civilization's used this, and that's why educating, while we have this window of instant information and we have this window of potentially everyday people, grassroots people garnering a reach. That's why it's very important to talk about these things and let them know that there is rules to this, and there's a reason why people who may be more conservative have been just openly losing for 3 to 5 decades.
Correct.
Just getting slayed ideologically, and it's because they're not grasping these concepts in the same way that these people who don't view humans with the empathy that a lot of conservatives share, because it's no question in my mind that a lot of conservatives are more compassionate than a lot of liberals in the progressive sense, right? Not in the classical sense, maybe. And, that kind of hurts them in this game, because they're playing against people who give, rules for radicals here, Saul Alinsky, they give zero craps about the feelings of people, and they only care about the agenda and the long-term goals and winning.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been struggling so much. And I see the tide changing with the trolls, with the election of Donald Trump, and there's stuff happening behind the scenes when people are starting to understand that we now have this power. If we study, we're not going to be taught it. No one is going to be taught how to do this. You're not going to be able to go to school and learn how to do this properly. It's going to take some self-motivation, and people are going to have to teach themselves. But when you do it, it's amazing the amount of change that you can enact if you're really motivated to do so.
Yeah, and there's the problem there is, Tom, and you would have come up against this too, there's a reluctance even by some conservatives to even, say, adjust the way they attack these problems, because it seems to me, and it might be the same for you and other people, some conservatives are quite happy to go on losing as long as they, retain the values. And I try to get the point across, right? There's a difference between tactics and strategy. So the strategy, right, is to, maintain your values, okay, and make sure you don't sort of sell your soul to the devil for the sake of winning, so to speak. But then tactics is something different entirely, and that's when we get into the memetics and you know, the narrative building and the attacking the media and the weak points and that kind of thing, and worrying about, blowback and deflection and how to cover off a story, rather don't let the other team just run wild with their own story. Make sure you get ahead of them and put up roadblocks so the story can only go so far, and then you have to turn them around and march them back. That's why people, I guess, say Donald Trump is perhaps the first meme president, Tom, is because he made an art form of that. He knew where they were going with their rhetoric. He knew where they were going with their attacks on him. So he would just get there first and then send them back the other way, right? And then they'd fall into his trap, so to speak.
Yeah, it's classic. And I would say the only difference between Donald Trump and really any other president isn't that he had the memes behind him. It's just that now people he put it in language that was discernible and palpable and understandable for that demographic, where normally people don't do that. Everyone has any political figure, any political president has ran and won with memes. The only difference now is
hope and change, Tom. Hope and change.
Right. And the only difference now is Donald Trump taught us that we can do that, by the way, that we can play that game too. And more often than not, we're actually more effective at it. But with the information age being what it is, now it's completely changed the political sphere. When Donald Trump passed Hillary Clinton on Twitter followers, people, a lot of people don't realize these things, but when Donald Trump passed Hillary Clinton on Twitter followers, this is actually a huge. Mm-hmm. I mean, for strategy, this is actually enormous, and it actually is amazing, because with something like Twitter, now Donald Trump doesn't have to disseminate his media. He spends so little on media. I mean, he's just master of being the enemy anyway. He painted himself as the enemy for a reason, but he's a master. And when I saw that he passed Twitter followers on Hillary Clinton, I said he knows he's on it. He understands, and he can disseminate his messages. Most of them trolly and humorous, and some of them just plainly outrageous. But when I saw that, I said, "Oh, this guy definitely understands exactly the game we're playing here."
Yeah.
And he energized the whole movement, and he put us on the offensive, which we never are. So many establishment conservatives, they love playing this high ground, like, well, I'll never,
losing with style.
Right? Yeah, I'll never, besmirch my perceived integrity to fight in the mud. It's like, well, when your children have communist boots on their throat, I hope they appreciate it in the same way you do.
Yeah, thanks, Pop.
Right. And, this fight is real for me. People sometimes ask me, why do I even care? Like, why do I do it? Why do I fight? Why am I not afraid to fight dirty? And it's because I have 2 children. This is not a game. It's not a game. It's not a philosophical game. This is a real thing.
Yeah.
My children are really seeing, and they're going to be seeing, the outcomes of things we're deciding right now in a very visceral way, and they already are. There's a reason why I pulled my son out of public schooling. There's a reason why, what they're facing now is something that we've never faced before in any kind of context, and it's due to the internet, it's due to the information age, and just the amount of propaganda and how quickly it's disseminated. And this is a real battle that's happening. This is a philosophical battlefield, but it has real world, real blood, person to person implications. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's why I don't care if someone perceives my move as maybe that's a little dangerous. Maybe that's a little, too out of the box. I don't know how much integrity that person has.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, winning is winning, and we're going against people who have no morals. So good luck trying to maintain trying to keep your moral high ground and go down with that sinking ship. It's easy for a lot of people to say, but I want to be able to look my children in the eyes in 20 years and say, yeah, when they ask me, where were you when the great culture war of 2017 happened? I say I was right at the front, and I was trying to make sure that we didn't end up, in a collectivist gulag. So, and, You know, that's one of the most frustrating. I'm not even conservative. I would never even really classify myself as conservative, probably. But, you know, that's why one of the main frustrations I have with, say, the Conservative Party and the new right, this kind of resurging, more independently thinking party that's really in the middle, is, you know, it's heartening to me. But that's one of my main frustrations with establishment conservatives is they don't care. Like they would rather lose everywhere, but then they can, you know, then they'll tell their kids or their family that I did what was right, you guys. You know, I didn't violate any kind of ethical rules there, and it's not really violating them either. You know, again, there's no big T in memetics. There's no big T in propaganda.
That's it. I mean, I was just watching. Sorry to cut you off there. I'm not going to speak ill of your boss, especially when he's not here. But I was watching one of Cerno's scopes the other day, and the topic was, I mean, we're talking about, you know, they don't care about. He was saying they don't care about the family, and he raised the same point you did. Like a lot of these people don't have children and stuff, and all the while he's got that gorgeous baby girl of his sitting on his lap. And, you know, like I'm not saying, you know, this is particularly shallow, but I'm saying like this is like a very visceral, clear, like marking a very visual representation of what he's talking about here, right? And I thought it was very, very clever because he's putting like a hard edge to would-be attackers, because he was saying, don't come after my family. You know, come after me all you like, I don't care. And he's bouncing little bub on his knee, you know, and he's like, these people don't care about families, such and such. And I just thought that's just like a little 5-minute moment like that is like a very, very intelligent way of making something more real in the moment rather than just saying it. Does that make any sense at all? Like, I'm probably dribbling, but
yeah, no, you're 100% right. And basically, for what you just pointed out is one of the main reasons why I like Cernovich so much. And this isn't me just kissing his ass because I work for his company.
No,
I liked Mike Cernovich, and the reason why I was drawn to Mike Cernovich before I even started working, have anything to do with Cernovich Media, is I recognized that really fast. He doesn't do anything that's unintentional.
Correct.
Everything he does is intentional. If he goes on Periscope, he has a message. He knows exactly what he's going to be doing, even if it's nuanced, even if, you know, the title's about something else. He has something he's trying to get across there. And I noticed that right away. When, you know, he appears all the time. I mean, no one... And it sucks because a lot of people, I don't think, really understand this, and they get caught up in the hubbub and the controversy of Mike Cernovich.
Well, they're probably first-level thinkers, you know. That's
exactly.
That's
I picked up on it right away, and when I first started, I watched him on YouTube. I didn't know about Periscope. I wasn't even on Twitter. I didn't really know about this whole world over here, but I was watching him on YouTube, and that's when I first started, like, kind of really realizing what he was doing, and just the amount of strategy that he actually has. And the fact that he's not afraid to think outside the box is something that the conservatives have never done in this way, and they've never done media this way. For instance, when he broke the Susan Rice unmasking story, I mean, it blew my mind. For anybody who doesn't know how he did this, he broke the Susan Rice unmasking story, a huge national story, and he broke that on Periscope while he was playing with his daughter. Just like laying on the carpet, just like playing, like, oh yeah, this is the baby. Oh, hey guys, by the way, Susan Rice, you know, kind of was unmasking people, unconstitutional. You know, it's a big scoop, not a big deal. I'm just here playing with Syra. And that's literally how he broke that story. And as soon as I saw that, I said, this is exactly what the conservative movement has been lacking for a long time.
Yep.
He broke a national story with huge, potentially national security implications, playing with his daughter on the carpet.
Like it ain't no thing.
I was like, this guy is great. And I started following them, and then, you know, through serendipity, I don't know. So I don't even really know how I ended up here, to be honest. It's just got to be...
The flat Earth planets align, Tom, obviously.
Well, of course, you know, scientifically speaking, that's accurate.
Well, the flat Earth planets aligned in a kind of swastika, you know... and, you know, extinction level event for minorities.
What's crazy to me, and one of the craziest things is nothing about this is new.
No.
Like, there is zero about the strategy that's new. It's never been done in the same way that he's doing it with the information age, in my opinion. And, with this whole kind of new information culture that we live in, this new internet, on-screen, transparent society that we live in. So it's never really been done that way. But, I mean, the strategies he's using are right out of, Sun Tzu.
Yeah, it's blowing the dust off an ancient playbook and going, hey, there's still some life in this thing yet,
I mean, as soon as I saw his strategy and I started following, and I was like, and it got to the point where I was starting, this is, again, before we had any kind of interaction, and the level at which he was playing, I was very drawn to, and I started being able to, like, he would have a YouTube video come out or something, and I would see the title, and I knew exactly how that was going to play out. Like, sure. I started picking up on a strategy, and I said, oh, he's going to say this. Even to the word sometime, I'm like, he's going to mention this. He's going to piggyback on that. He's going to spin in this direction. And I was like, I kind of became in tune there, and one of the people from Cernovich Media would follow, I sent him one of my periscopes when I was applying, and he watched it, and I think when I was trying to explain to my viewers the different paradigms that we live in, and even the different paradigms of existence that we live in, psychologically speaking, in our own conservative movement, in the MAGA movement, that's the new name for it. And I was explaining that there's people that are fighting within a paradigm, an old school, not guerrilla tactic, very third dimension.
Yep.
And they're having success as far as getting viewers, but as far as changing society in any kind of way, they weren't having it. And then, they get on screen, or they write articles, and they're like, man, I have 100,000 followers, but I'm still not getting the message out. Meanwhile, you have someone who, at the time had way less viewers than that, or way less followers than that, so to speak, way less social reach than that, and was just demolishing. And it really enacting and starting movements that were changing society. And some would say for the worse, some would say it's for the better. I guess it's open for interpretation. But
yeah, well,
when I start,
sorry, go on.
Yeah, so when he saw me explaining the different paradigms psychologically that people are living in and that people are willing to fight at, and the new age, this fourth dimension, he talks about all the time. In fact, he did if you guys haven't seen it, if you type in, like, I think Mike Stern on YouTube, you type in Mike Cernovich, Jeff Giese, fourth dimensional warfare or memetics, it will come up. And for anybody who doesn't know who Jeff Giese is, as far as the memetics are concerned, he is kind of one of the unassumed heroes. And he probably wouldn't like to be called that, but he wrote a paper for the UN on the use of memetics. Okay. And he published it, and they did a whole scope about it. And they tell people, the one good thing about this is they're super transparent about it, in the same way that I am. When I talk about writing stories, when I talk about media spin, I use the term propaganda. I don't say, I say I'm a journalist, but if someone asks me, do you do propaganda? I'll say, yes, I do. Of course I do. And, that term propaganda was given a bad name in World War II. After, the Nazis used it a lot, then they kind of spun the term propaganda to mean something, to have a negative connotation. But before that, it didn't. And in fact, before that, a lot of people made a heck of a good living, like Edward Bernays, and it did enact a lot of social change using propaganda. And there's a whole spectrum of propaganda. It's not just that it's bad. There's white, black, gray propaganda.
Yep. And
a lot of people don't understand that spectrum. So this is a term I'm trying to pull back. I'm trying to use this term. I'm open with people what I'm doing.
Mike,
because it's something
sorry, let me turn him off for a sec. I was just looking for that video. I was just going to pop that video up on the screen for everyone. Sorry.
Oh yeah. These are things that I want people to be able to talk about. When I see people talking about the news, I don't want them talking about the news. I want them saying, did you see the propaganda from MSNBC?
Yeah, it was quality.
Did you see the Fox? Yeah. Did you see the Fox News propaganda they were just putting out today? I feel like if people were to start addressing these issues in terms that a lot of people understand, but maybe have a misinterpretation of kind of their true power, their true,
the effect
energy,
they can have on people. Yeah.
Right. That's what's going to help really change society. That's what's going to help break and create a new media and start operating in this fourth dimensional area. And there's a lot of people who get these abstract concepts, and some still don't. But that's why I'm never shy to talk about them. And I use terms that might be triggering. I use terms that might make someone shake their head, but I do that intentionally because, it's very Milo sometimes, but, he understands this concept just as well as I do, probably better.
Sure. One of the funniest stories, well, not funniest, one of the most interesting stories about propaganda I recall, Tom, is during World War II when they were trying to get German soldiers to cross over to the Allies, right, to give up. And they would litter the battlefield with propaganda that said, listen, come over, you'll get a hot meal, we'll take care of you, we're not going to shoot you, we're not going to arrest you. If you just surrender, you can have a wash, you can have a hot meal, there'll be no more fighting, you can relax. And this was actually true, right? But it didn't work because they thought it was too good to be true. They're obviously lying to us. So, then there's no way they're going to give us a hot meal. So what the Allies did was develop propaganda that wasn't so positive and instead focused on them. Like, okay, you can give up now. You won't be seen, you won't be held in shame by your countrymen and words of this nature. And instead that had a huge effect rather than saying, hey, come over, we'll give you a hot meal and a shower. So, like I said, like you said, little things like that. It's all about framing, and it's all about the effect that it can have on people. Positive, negative, white, black, grey propaganda. Propaganda is just a word. I often say to people, Goebbels was a brilliant man. And they will look at me in shock horror. And I say, well, brilliance is neither good or bad. It can be good and it can be bad, but brilliance in itself has no inherent good or bad quality. It just means you're really, 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 really good at something, right? If not for good or bad purposes, rather, so to speak. You're just very competent at what you're doing. So Goebbels was a brilliant man. Now, did he use his brilliance for good in the world? Some may argue, perhaps not. But right. He was still really competent at what he did and very effective.
One of the main figures that I always use, because Goebbels, obviously someone like Goebbels, when you say Goebbels, the image that comes to people's mind is it's always very hard to work your way up from that.
Oh, now. This one. There you go. Been waiting all day to break that one out.
Yeah. There you go. It paints a picture, and people already have that meme. It's a meme, by the way. Goebbels is a meme, and that's, the term I like to use for memetics, and it's something that Richard Dawkins kind of adapted. He was one of the first ones to actually use the term memetic. But and if people started thinking about it like this, it would make sense. A meme is a unit of information in the mind whose existence influences events such that more copies of itself get created in other minds. And the most important aspect of meming, of memetics, is replication of ideas. So just Goebbels in general, the fact that when I think of Goebbels now, it proves, and the image that's conjured up in my head, it proves that whatever the meme was pushed about Goebbels, whether it be true, probably very true, but whatever meme was pushed about that, I now associate with that image.
Sure.
And so with what Dawkins coined when he coined memetics, and he was actually talking about evolutionary biology, and what these kind of terms is that it's a scaffolding. It's a completely neutral scaffolding. It's a structure that you can use to analyze information, and how you use it at that point is dangerous. But it could be dangerous, or it could be very helpful. And one of the people I always quote, that's what I was going to talk about. One of the people I always quote, if you ever want to research propaganda, there has been almost no one, and the name doesn't ring in the same way, doesn't have the same meme associated with it as, say, Goebbels does, is Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is the father of propaganda. That's, a coined term, the father of propaganda. He literally wrote the book called Propaganda.
Yeah. Goebbels studied it. He studied Bernays, right?
but if you say Edward Bernays, almost no one knows who that is.
Exactly.
And it also doesn't bring that very harsh image to their brain. So I use Edward Bernays a lot. And a lot of people don't realize that his memes, and if you think that memes are new just because the internet invented it, what I would challenge you to do, anybody who's listening, is to go look at a World War II pamphlet and then look at a modern meme and tell me what's different. And I will tell you nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing is different. In fact, it is literally the same. It's an image with words on it portraying a message. The only thing that's different is now it's digital. But the concept, when you see a meme, you're seeing a modern day leaflet drop. That's it. And
you don't even have to be holding a rifle. It just comes straight to your inbox.
And in 1 second, you can send it as far as you want. If you have 100,000 followers and you just shared a meme, you just shared a leaflet to 100,000 people in a matter of a second.
Yep.
And so if you think that the propaganda game has changed, it really hasn't. It's just that now we're starting to understand and we're being able to go on the offensive with it as opposed to just getting bombarded with it all the time.
Correct.
But Edward Bernays, I mean, if you want to study someone who understands this and not on the short term, not even surface level stuff. So, for instance, his tactic, he was great at the long game, where, like, I did a whole scope. I don't even know how many hours it was, probably like 7. I don't remember, on how bacon is a meme in the United States, and how it's actually one of the longest, most successful running memes that we have. That's still very topical in today's day and age, and a lot of people don't understand that before.
Well, Jim Gaffigan made a whole career out of it.
Literally.
Yeah.
And when you talk about bacon, I mean, just ask any American. I don't really care what political spectrum. If you just ask any American, "Oh, do you like bacon?" Even if they don't like bacon, they'll be like, "Well, bacon's American." Like they don't. That meme is lasted and stuck, but they don't realize that was completely intentional. And Edward Bernays worked for the Beach. He was hired as a PR. And in his terms, PR is just a polite way of saying propaganda.
Yep.
He was hired by the Beechnut Packing Company. They had all this pork product that no one would buy. It was literally the leftovers of what they were producing. And he adapted that, and they said, okay, we have this product. What can we do with it? We're just throwing it out at this point. And he made that one of the most popular breakfast foods still today. And this was in like 1926. We're talking 100-year meme still running. And I mean, he made a lot of people a lot of money, by the way, not just for the Beechnut Packing Company, but the people who sell bacon now are rolling in fat cash.
Sure.
But and I like choosing topics like that to talk about propaganda because it's relatable and it's something that's very palpable to the American people and around the world. But specifically, if you can focus on something that somehow has garnered some kind of weird patriotic association meme with it, so he had the bacon meme, and what he did was the first place he went is to doctors, and he got enough doctors to say that a hearty breakfast was the best kind of breakfast, and then he associated hearty with bacon and eggs. And if anybody wants to know where the bacon and eggs breakfast came from, it was because he did that. And he got his slogans, his ads would say 9 out of 10 doctors say that a hearty breakfast is the best breakfast. And then the image would be bacon and eggs. And so he created an association meme that is still running. Another one of the projects that he did was when, I don't know if you did this, but a lot of people who have grandmas, I'm sure, will know that somewhere at their grandma's house, there's a piano lurking in their house just collecting dust somewhere.
Sure.
And another one of his successful memes that a lot of people can relate to is he got hired by the company who produced pianos to sell pianos. And in effect, what he did was not sell pianos at all. He didn't even aim to try to sell pianos like as a specific product. What he did was he marketed to architects, and he marketed to engineers and people who were developers, people who were building houses. And he made he would run ads, and he made the concept of having a music room cool.
Yep.
In people's houses, and he made it a cultural phenomenon in which it was associated with, wealth or, cultural intellect or whatever it is, cultural, relevance to have a music room in your house. And then all the ads he would run just happened to feature the brand of piano, but he never focused on it distinctly. But that created an enormous phenomenon in which the piano became the staple of everyone in America's music rooms.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like, you're not classy if you don't have a piano in the music room, Tom, and you're not a real American unless you got a big plate of bacon sitting on top of it, brother. Now that is brilliant, and you're right. If you want people to learn more pardon me, about this kind of propaganda stuff, that's a great way of going about it because it's entry level, it's not offensive. I did take note of the person saying, don't ever say Goebbels was brilliant, that's bad persuasion. Yes, but, I'm not trying to persuade Tom of anything.
Yeah, I disavow.
He disavows me.
Jesus, Mr. White, I disavow your open, blatant Nazism.
Exactly.
Jesus, man, get a hold of yourself. I disavow.
Oh, I can't.
I'm never going to work after this again.
Well, just before we wrap it up, Tom, maybe you can tell us what have you got on the horizon? What's coming next? What are you working on now?
Well, there's a few things coming down in the pipeline. I'm switching. I'm pretty open about this. I'm switching my long-term memetic strategy up because it's time for a new phase. And you're going to see me probably reaching out to far more liberals than almost anybody in conservative media has done. And not necessarily liberals in media, but liberals in culture. I'm going to be focusing on topics that you wouldn't normally associate with politics, but they are, in the long term, in the big game, vastly more important, to be honest. One of the reasons for this is, you have a viral video of some political commentator that you like, and it goes viral, quote-unquote viral, and maybe it gets 500,000 views or something. And then right next to it, you will see, a cat video that got 2.3 million views. And there's a reason for that, and there's a metric for why those videos and why a movie trailer is still getting 10 million views, and the most viral, Stefan Molyneux video is only getting a certain amount of views, not nearly comparable usually. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to start focusing on the other aspects of culture, not just politically, because they're actually more important than the political stuff a lot of times. I'm going to start, and the way I'm going to be formulating a lot of my interviews going forward, my personal interviews, not necessarily people, and I'm not speaking for my company here, I'm just speaking on a personal level, because we're still going to have the political interviews and do stuff like that, but for specifically my projects that I'm headlining, I'm going to be focusing on just having discussions, even with people who I absolutely disagree with, in fact, mostly people who I absolutely disagree with, okay. And so you'll be seeing me interview people who work out, people who do mindset seminars, people who even maybe do cooking or any other aspect besides political. A lot of times you're going to start seeing me reach out to those and getting those information out there, because the political spectrum, the political slice of society that we live in is just one slice. And if people only focus on that one slice, and even if you have short-term gains in that sliver of society, you're going to lose long-term, because you're not affecting the culture. You're not reaching out to huge audiences that you would not normally be able to see. And so, yeah, in the future, we have a few big things coming up. We have Juanita Broderick's going to be on this week, and there's a few things with that. We also trolled Bill Clinton. We invited him on the show. I highly doubt he'll come on, but we
offer him some blow and he'll be there.
Well, he still has never, as far as I know, but I know at the point of the interview I was watching, he still has never personally denied that he raped anybody, which I think is interesting. But you're good, yeah. So, but on some of my interviews, you're going to start seeing me reach out, and I'm networking like crazy right now. Okay. I'm reaching out to all sorts of people from all different walks of life. If you are in the inner city and you want to reach out to me, do it. I don't care what your specialty is. If you want to talk about anything, just let me know. My DMs are open.
Well, just throwing your Twitter up there, at Tom Shadilay. Get in touch.
At Tom Shadilay.
Get Absolutely.
In touch. I am open source. I am political, but that's not the only thing I focus on, and I have a long-term strategy here. And for anybody who wants to have a conversation, or if you know someone who maybe would be good, who even if you don't agree with politically, just let me know who might be a good interview or might be a good discussion. Again, it's going to be, I think I'm kind of going to be mimicking here something akin to what Joe Rogan would be.
Maybe a bit of conservative Dave Rubin, perhaps.
Oh, I love Dave Rubin.
Yeah.
Dave Rubin has a great idea. He has a great strategy, and in the long term, it's going to pay off for him.
Well, the interesting thing though about Dave Rubin is it ended up turning him, didn't it? So let's hope that you don't end up being a crazy cat lady with bold frame glasses and pink hair anytime soon, Tom. Because
well, what you don't know is when I have this very effective live video editing software, and I actually am about a 180-year-old woman, and I have 70 cats.
Of course.
But I have this new DARPA technology that it just edits live time, and it makes me out to be this very chiseled, just rippling abs, bearded wonder that a lot of people see. But in reality, my name's Dolores, and I drink a lot of warm milk. So
nice. Because if it was cold, that would be truly racist. Tom Shadilay channeling J. Edgar Hoover, member of the Deep State, very genuine, nice guy. If people want to get in touch with you, do so via the Twitter. Looking forward to some of your upcoming conversations, Tom. It's going to be very interesting stuff. Like the late great Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. So there is, like you said, there is a wider pie there, not just the political slice, although people tend to be dominated by the political slice now. But, with guys like you out there, I saw a lot of positive comments in the chat. People say you're going places. I want to wish you all the best. And most of all, though, Tom, I want to thank you so much for having this chat with me and letting, my listeners get a taste of what it's like to be in the alternative media and a little bit of better understanding of what you guys actually do and how you do it. So thank you so much for your time, Tom.
Absolutely, man. I'll have to have you on my scope one day, and then I'll reciprocate, and then you can make fun of me, and you can say per se too much.
We'll do.
Oh, all right. Awesome. Do. Thank you, guys. Tom Shadilay. Hit me up on Twitter, and then you guys can see my work also on Mike Cernovich's Facebook channel and some work on his YouTube channel as well. So don't be afraid to reach out and talk to me. I'm just a person, I promise.
He is just a person, an overweight person with very, very good editing software, but a person nonetheless. So we shouldn't be too harsh. Maybe more than one person.
Jesus, man. Whatever, bro. Just go back to watching your old propaganda videos and idolizing.
Will do.
Idolizing effective propagandas.
Yeah, there we go. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks again, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Guys, if you want to catch up with this later on or you want to send it to someone, it will be on the podcast, and the podcast can be found at, let me just throw it up at the screen there for you, thecommondiscourse.com. We'll also have the video up. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that was Tom Shadilay. I'm Damien White. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
And we saw the polling industry doing everything they could to demoralize our campaign.
Came, we saw, we died.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.
Go home to mommy. Bye.